Welcome to the Every Mom is an Athlete podcast, where we believe that motherhood is inherently athletic. I see you lifting car seats, chasing toddlers, and carrying groceries one-handed while holding a baby and a coffee. Your daily life is a workout. I'm Dr. Karlie, pregnancy and postpartum expert, sports chiropractor, strength coach, entrepreneur, and mom of 3. Here you'll find solo episodes and real conversations with other moms and leading experts, so you can live your strongest, healthiest, most aligned life in motherhood. No matter how long it's been since you've had your baby, whether you're reconnecting with your body, rebuilding your strength, or just figuring out what feels good again, you're in the right place. Hi there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. Just a quick heads up before we get started. This episode includes a short discussion about intimacy and adult topics. If you've got little ears around, you might want to pop in some headphones or listen later. Let's dive in. So on today's episode, we are going to answer some questions from you guys. I posted on my Instagram asking what you guys want to know about early postpartum, recovery, rehab. I get all kinds of DMs in my inbox every week. And a lot of them are the same questions, honestly, that people ask over and over. Just stuff that is not really common knowledge, and there's just not a lot of education around. So I'm really excited to answer some of these today. So no matter where you are in your journey, whether you're pregnant now, you're newly postpartum, or if you've been postpartum for quite a while now, I've got some great questions and answers for you today. So I think there's a little bit for everyone out there. So let's get started. Our first question today is one that I get a lot, and I actually have 3 or 4 versions of this, but here's the one I'm going to read to you. It's, when do I start wearing a postpartum belly band after a normal vaginal birth? So there could be a couple different options of what she's asking about here. There's a few different belly bands that we could be talking about. One could be the really intense, thick, really structured belly band that women use after a C-section, okay? And this I actually do recommend women use if they have a C-section, really for about the first couple weeks. I try to say limit it to that, but it is going to help with swelling, healing, just taking a little pressure off your core because you have had a really intense surgery. And so this is going to be a good time to wear that kind of structured belly band. Often the hospital will give you that band. I don't think she's talking about this, but just to be clear, I don't usually recommend you use that type of belly band if you didn't have a C-section. So the second type of belly band we could be talking about is just a piece of elastic fabric, basically, that really thin. Some women wear them during their pregnancy just to support the belly a little. I don't think there's anything really wrong with this because it does give you a little bit of feedback as you're starting to rebuild your core. Because what we want to do postpartum is rebuild our muscles and re-strengthen our muscles on our own to create that pressure, that strength. When you use a belly band outside of when you actually need it, what you're doing is creating this false sense of stability. So think of it like if your neck hurt and you went to the doctor and you were like, hey, my neck hurts. And instead of maybe getting a massage or doing some exercises or seeing a chiropractor or doing anything that might be helpful and active to get your neck back to where it feels better, you just stuck a neck brace on and you're okay, now my neck's all better. That's the same idea if you're thinking about a belly band, a really structured belly band after you have a normal vaginal birth. We just don't need it. We don't need that intense kind of outside help. So all that to say, that little thin one that gives you a little feedback, that's okay for that first little bit. If it really makes you feel more comfortable, feels like it kind of holds everything in together, that's fine. But you don't want to get reliant on it and you don't want to build thick ones. So that brings me to sort of the third option that I've already alluded to, which is the shape shifter ones, the ones that are trying to turn you into an hourglass figure. Those, I just really, truly never recommend. Another analogy for those would be, think about a balloon, a blown up balloon. Okay. And then you're going to squeeze it right in the middle. So if you squeeze that balloon, all the pressure is going to go up, which is up into your diaphragm or the top of your core. And then it's also going to go down into your pelvic floor. And so that's a lot of additional pressure that we do not need pressing down on our pelvic floor, especially after we've just had a baby. So I really just never recommend those types of belly band. That's a really roundabout way of answering all of that. Realistically, if you had an uncomplicated vaginal birth, that means, not a lot of tearing besides maybe just a little grade 1, maybe even a grade 2, there was nothing too crazy that happened, you shouldn't necessarily need a belly band. What you want to start with is breathing, bracing, relearning to engage your core all the way around, not just in your abs, right? But like the whole barrel that is your core. So let's just practice that for a minute because I feel like I talk about this all the time and people don't always know what I mean. So when we're talking about breathing exercises, really not just in early postpartum, but anytime, we want to think about, like I said, engaging the whole barrel. So take a deep breath in. As you breathe in, your belly should actually expand out. Okay. So think about like, your diaphragm is pushing down as your lungs fill up with air. Your diaphragm is the muscle kind of right below where your ribs are that actually helps you to breathe. Everything's filling up. So your belly should puff out a little. And then as you breathe out, the belly kind of comes in and that's what's like pushing the air out. So the first thing that I start women on in early postpartum is that breathing. So we call it 360 breathing. So you can put your hands sort of on the bottom of your ribs because you want to breathe in all the way around. You want to feel the breath in your low back, in your ribs, on the sides, and the front. So take that big breath in, letting the belly fill up with air. And then as you breathe out, you can feel all of that kind of compressing down. So that's sort of where I start women off with their breathing drills. But I have a couple of other questions here that we actually are probably going to get into breathing a little bit more. So let me back up and not like get too far on this tangent. So let's see what's next here. When can you start working on your core and pelvic floor postpartum? If you know me, if you follow me at all, if you've heard me talk about this, I think you know what my answer is going to be, and that is right away. So the breathing drills that we were just talking about, those can be done honestly as early as the day you give birth. I was doing those with all 3 of my kids in the hospital bed, just trying to get some feedback, some control over my body, and just also like to kind of down regulate your whole nervous system, right? We know there's so much research on breath work. And so this is sort of combining that physical healing and improvements with the mental as well. So you can start that right away. Do I think you have to? No, but I think that as soon as you can start that, you're going to feel like you have more control, like you're getting reconnected with your body. And that feels really good for most women. You can start that, like I said, as early as day 1. The other thing I want to talk about here is she does ask about pelvic floor. And so the thing I like to start my patients off with, and everyone who goes through my plans starts off learning this, is that we don't necessarily want to be doing things like, okay, now I am doing my pelvic floor exercises. I am squeezing, I am doing Kegels. What we want to do is actually make it more automatic. So by using the breath that we were talking about earlier, as we take the breath in, our pelvic floor is going to drop down. And as we breathe out, it's going to rise up. So we use that natural breath in a lot of the things that I train women to do so that we're automatically engaging the pelvic floor and we're not having to think so much about it. So my postpartum plan is designed that if you had an uncomplicated birth, you can realistically start it within the first couple days if you want to. And that is what I've done with all of my kids. But realistically, most people don't want to do that. So in the first couple weeks is generally when most women will start, but it is designed, it's gentle enough at the beginning, and it's breathing and bracing and, really just gentle things that are safe and effective that you can start it as soon as you feel ready. Now, if you had a C-section, that's a little bit different story because obviously now you've had a major surgery. And so my C-section plan is designed to be started as early as 2 weeks. Again, many women don't start it that early, but I do work with some high-level athletes who have started as early as 2 weeks because they just want to feel like they're working towards something and they have something to get back to and they have their time to like work on their bodies, work on their fitness, work towards that goal that they have. So that's the answer as far as when you can start. Now, if you don't have a plan, I really don't recommend that you just jump into finding things online and starting within those first couple days, those first couple weeks, because your body is still in such like a sensitive, vulnerable place that you only want to be doing things that are going to help you, right? You only want to be doing things that are going to be working towards your goal of getting back to the things that you love to do, no matter what that is, right? Whether that's lifting weights, running, jujitsu, climbing, I don't care. Whatever it is, just running around with your kids, those are your goals. And anything that's going to be a little too hard or detract from those, we don't want to get into that zone. And so, of course, that is why I have developed my postpartum restoration plan, which is going to help you in 20 minutes a day, 4 days a week, get back to where you want to be. And it's a full body plan, right? So we've got mobility, we've got glute work, we've got upper body, we've got pelvic floor, all sort of wrapped into one simple plan for you to do on your own. Our next question, and actually, I had a few questions about this. It's regarding pain during sex, sort of in that early postpartum phase. So this says, I'm having pain during sex. I had a C-section and it's not scar pain. Is this a pelvic floor issue? There's actually a lot more that I probably need to know to answer this question, right? But a few things. One is that we have to remember, even if you have a C-section, there's a lot of pressure on your pelvic floor for the 9 months before that. So even though the baby didn't come out that way, it's still your pelvic floor took quite a beating really over those 9 months. And so I tell my patients that you are just as likely to need pelvic floor physical therapy after having a C-section as you are a vaginal birth. So just some women don't realize that. They think they're like, oh, well, the baby didn't come out that way. So what could be wrong with my pelvic floor? Well, still, like I said, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of body changes, hormonal changes. So it's not uncommon that you would need to get checked out. That being said, my first advice would be if you're ever having pain during sex, that you do get in to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. And the reason is they can do an internal exam. They can feel the muscles. You know, your pelvic floor is made of a bunch of different muscles. So they can feel, okay, is there one muscle on one side that's too tight? They can either release that for you, teach you how to release it. Is there one muscle on another side that's like not firing or engaging? You know, they can give you all this feedback. And you really, that's what you want from a pelvic floor physical therapist. Okay. I mean, they can do external exams as well, of course. But if you're having pain during sex, that's something where you're going to want an internal exam. I'd also like to remind people here that, like, as I sort of just alluded to, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are too tight or too weak. Like, we can't ever make that judgment on our own, right? We don't really know what's going on with the pelvic floor without having some sort of outsider input to tell us, like from a pelvic floor physical therapist. And that's why, you know, for so many years, women were just doing Kegels thinking, oh, this is strengthening my pelvic floor. Well, in reality, for a lot of those women, their pelvic floors were already too tight. And what they needed was to learn how to relax it. Okay. So that's where you can have the same symptoms of a tight pelvic floor and a pelvic floor that needs strengthening. You can have the same symptoms. And so it really does take a professional to help you determine what you should be doing there. All that to say, I'll get off my soapbox now. Ideally, you can see a pelvic floor physical therapist, and hopefully that will help you with the pain during sex, because that's no fun. Nobody deserves to have that. Next question. Ooh, I love talking about this. When do you think it's safe to go running postpartum? So sort of the general rule of thought for this is 12 weeks. Okay. So that's sort of just the number that we use, sort of like, 6 weeks till you can start exercising. Now, we know those numbers are not hard and fast, but there are some hard and fast things that I have my patients in my office do to get back to running postpartum. And this all comes from physical therapy research. So I've sort of tweaked it a little bit to be more applicable with the patient population that I work with. So I'm going to tell you those and then we'll go from there. So the first one is you need to be able to hop on one foot for 30 seconds to a minute. So that's each foot, okay, individually. And the reason is running is a single leg sport. So we need to feel confident and comfortable and make sure that our hips are able to bear all the weight of our body on one side without any pain, without any discomfort, that sort of thing. Number two, you need to be able to hop on both feet for 30 seconds to a minute. Okay. And this is just to make sure you're not having any leaking, pain, just discomfort, like you're feeling okay with that. Number three would be you can hold a plank for 30 seconds to a minute. I don't care if you're on your hands or your elbows, but what this is going to show us is that your core is stable enough to support your extremities, because we can't expect to have like a nice stable foot, knee, hip, shoulder, wrist, all these things at work if our core at the center isn't stable. So that's a really important piece that I think a lot of the runners that I see end up missing because they're not thinking about running as like a core sport, but really it is. And then the fourth one would be you need to be able to hold a wall sit. So where you're sitting bum against the wall, right? Knees like at 90 degrees for 30 seconds to a minute. And this is just going to help you determine, okay, do I have enough strength in my legs? Do I have enough endurance in my legs to get out and spend some time pounding the pavement? So if you've got all those things, even if it's before 12 weeks, then I recommend that my patients, let's have you go out around the block, right? So don't go out for like, a mile out and then you have to come back a mile. Like go around the block a few times, make it a loop. That way, if you kind of get caught and you're like, oh gosh, I actually am starting to have some leaking. Oh, I'm having some pain, like whatever it is, then you can just like come back home and you're not stuck and have to get back home. So that's sort of what I recommend there. And also start with walk run. I'm sure I'm going to have an episode in the future about getting back to running postpartum because it's just like people ask about it so often and I could talk about it forever. But you do want to start with a walk run, right? Where you're like slowly easing back into running and, really listening to what your body is telling you. One thing that people don't really think about when they're getting back to running and really getting back to all kinds of exercise is that if you're still nursing, your body is still like pumped full of all kinds of hormones, okay? So you're not nearly as stable as you're going to be once you stop breastfeeding, which no, like I'm not saying stop breastfeeding, okay? Obviously, don't hear me wrong there, but I am saying like, you can probably get back to close to 90%. I would say most of my patients and myself with my 3 births, I felt like I've gotten back to 90%. And then once I stopped breastfeeding, within a few months after that, I'm like, okay, now my joints all feel like really stable and like how they did before I had the baby or before I was pregnant. So I just mentioned that to keep in mind because there can be issues with like pain in the knees, pain in the ankles and the hips and like areas that you might not be thinking about just because your joints are still a little bit loose. You're still dealing with some of those hormones through your system. And so it's just something to keep in mind and be aware of. Last question for the day. How can I start exercising at 18 weeks pregnant safely? I didn't exercise before. I feel like women for so long have heard like, oh, if you didn't exercise, if you didn't do it before, you can't start when you're pregnant. And to some degree, maybe it's true a little bit, but there's actually quite a lot of research now that starting to exercise during pregnancy is really beneficial for you and your baby. Now, does that mean you're going to start training for a marathon when you're pregnant? No, probably not. Does it mean you're going to sign up for a CrossFit competition if that's not what you were doing before? Probably not. But you can definitely start doing a lot more than what you're doing. I recommend, let's say if we have someone who didn't exercise at all, I'm going to recommend starting with walking and specifically hill walking, okay? Because that's going to get your heart rate up a little bit more. It's going to use your posterior chain or your glutes and your hamstrings. And remember, your glutes are directly connected to your pelvic floor. So it's like doing pelvic floor exercises, again, automatically without having to think about it too much. So that's where I always have people start. You can call it a weighted walk, right? Because maybe you're already like gaining weight with your baby if you're, 18 weeks pregnant. So there you go. There's your everyone's talking about their weighted vest walk. There you go. There's yours. If you're already doing a lot of walking, let's say, you walk your dog every day or every other day or whatever it is you do, you can get into, getting a personal trainer, going to a bar class, going to Orange Theory even. There's Barry's Boot Camp, CrossFit. Like there are all these things that you can do. And any coach who's worth their salt should be able to help you modify everything that you need to do to still get a good workout. Another thing I'll clear up real quick is just they used to say, I don't even remember what the number was because it's such outdated information, but I think it was like, don't get your heart rate above 150 maybe or 140 when you're pregnant. But we know now that like, we don't use that. It's been proven to be unscientific and there's no like science behind it. It was just a random number some dude probably picked. We generally use a rate of perceived exertional scale. And so what I tell my patients there is when you're pregnant, you don't want to go above like a 6 or a 7, which is you're able to talk. Okay. It doesn't mean you have to be talking perfectly like this. Maybe it's like you're like taking a couple of deep breaths and then you like catch your breath and then you can talk again, sort of like that. It doesn't have to be like a perfect sentence. Okay. But you just don't want to be completely out of breath, redlining. That's not where we want to be. That's what I would say as far as exercise during pregnancy is there is a lot of research showing that it's beneficial for you, it's beneficial for your baby. And so don't let anyone tell you because you weren't doing it before that you can't do it now just because you're pregnant, because you totally can. You just need to find A, something you enjoy, B, something that you feel supported in, that they can help you and modify as you need, as your pregnancy progresses. And C, you want to make sure that like the stuff that you're doing is actually moving you towards your goals. I like to tell people, like, think of it's a cost benefit analysis, especially during pregnancy, right? Like, are you going to get more fit during pregnancy? If you're starting from nothing, if you haven't worked it out at all, then yes, probably you are. But if you've been working out and you're just trying to maintain, then most likely not, right? So your goal is just to continue moving your body, continue feeling healthy, keep the strength that you have, and then move forward. So you want to make sure that the exercises that you're doing are actually going to help with labor, with your recovery postpartum, all that sort of thing. Shameless plug, obviously I developed a whole pregnancy core plan, and I made that during my third pregnancy, really because I was just so tired. I had 2 kids, like 4 and under. I didn't have the time to work out that I did in my first 2 pregnancies. So some days all I would do is get in a walk. And then I knew, okay, if I can do 5 or 10 minutes of core work that I know is going to help me recover postpartum, help me to like actually have the strength to push my baby out and hopefully labor less time, then that's a win, right? So anyways, check out that plan if you want. It's called Prego Core. I am just like such a huge fan because I felt so much stronger and so much better after this third pregnancy, being almost 40 years old, that I did my first 2, which is just amazing. And I know it's because I devoted so much time to core work, where in the first 2 pregnancies, I was really focused so much more on just working out, not specifically thinking about like core work that's going to help me through my labor, through postpartum, if that makes sense. That is all the questions we have today. If you would like your question answered, just drop it in my DMs at Dr. Karlie. You can also shoot me an email, drkarlie@karliekazi.com, with your questions. And I'm going to try to do these. We'll see how you guys like them, and then that'll determine how often I do them. But I hope this episode answers some questions that maybe you've had. I just want to remind you that you are so strong. Your body is so strong. You deserve care and clarity and support in this new postpartum phase that you're going through. So if there's anything I can do to help you through this phase, I would love to be of assistance. You've got my info. You know where to find me. Until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Every Mom is an Athlete isn't just a podcast. It's a reminder. Motherhood is athletic, and you're still the athlete you've always been. But it's not about going back. It's about moving forward intentionally and powerfully. If this episode resonated with you, I'd so appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend, leave a quick review, or rate the show. It helps more moms to hear what they need to believe, that every mom is an athlete. See you next time.